The marble columns of ancient Athens gleamed white against the Mediterranean sun, their surfaces carved with scenes that would make even modern audiences blush. Behind the philosophical debates and military conquests that defined classical Greece lay a sexual culture so complex and bizarre that it challenges everything we think we know about ancient civilization. The Greeks who gave us democracy, theatre, and mathematical principles also practiced intimate rituals that were simultaneously sacred and scandalous, revered and reviled. What emerges from the surviving pottery, literature, and archaeological evidence is not the sanitized version of antiquity taught in schools, but a society where sexuality permeated every aspect of daily life in ways that seem almost alien to contemporary sensibilities. From religious ceremonies involving public nudity to marriage customs that would horrify modern parents, ancient Greece operated according to sexual norms that were as sophisticated as they were shocking. The sexual practices of classical Greece were not merely personal choices, but fundamental expressions of political power, religious devotion, and social hierarchy. To understand these intimate customs is to glimpse the true nature of a civilization that continues to influence Western thought over 2 millennia later. The reality behind the marble statues and epic poems reveals a world where sexuality was weaponized, sanctified, and systematically regulated in ways that seem both primitive and startlingly modern. Ancient Greek sexuality existed within a framework that prioritized social position over personal preference, masculine dominance over equality, and civic duty over individual desire. The gymnasium, where athletes trained naked, was not merely a sports facility, but a complex social institution where older men mentored younger ones through relationships that combined intellectual instruction with physical intimacy. These connections were not hidden or shameful, but celebrated as essential to the development of ideal citizens. The concept of homosexuality as we understand it today simply did not exist in ancient Greece. Instead, sexual relationships were categorized according to active and passive roles, with social status determining who could penetrate whom. Freeborn Greek men were expected to be sexually dominant in all their relationships, whether with wives, slaves, or younger male citizens. The idea of mutual pleasure between equals was largely foreign to a culture that viewed sex as an expression of power rather than affection. Women in ancient Greece occupied a paradoxical position within this sexual hierarchy. While legally considered property of their fathers and husbands, they participated in religious festivals that celebrated female sexuality with an intensity that bordered on the orgiastic. The Thesmophoria, dedicated to the goddess Demeter, involved married women engaging in ritual activities that included explicit sexual symbolism and temporary reversal of normal social roles. The most shocking aspect of Greek sexual culture may have been its treatment of adolescent males. The practice of pederasty was not merely tolerated, but institutionalized as a form of education. Older men, typically in their 30s or 40s, would court boys between 12 and 18 years old through elaborate rituals involving gifts, poetry, and public displays of affection. These relationships were governed by strict social protocols that distinguished between acceptable and deviant behavior. The courting process itself followed patterns that seemed bizarre by contemporary standards. Wealthy men would present themselves at gymnasiums and schools where they could observe potential partners exercising naked. The most desirable boys attracted multiple suitors who competed through displays of wealth and artistic talent. Successful courtship required the approval of the boy's family, who viewed these relationships as opportunities for their sons to gain powerful patrons and social connections. Sexual positions and practices were meticulously documented on pottery that served as both art and instruction manual. The surviving vases reveal techniques and arrangements that demonstrate remarkable creativity and anatomical knowledge. Some positions appear designed more for symbolic than practical purposes, reflecting beliefs about power dynamics that extended far beyond the bedroom into the political sphere. The Greeks developed an extensive vocabulary for sexual acts that distinguish between practices based on social appropriateness rather than physical mechanics. Certain activities were considered suitable for relationships with slaves, but degrading when performed with free citizens. The language itself reveals how deeply sexual behavior was integrated with concepts of honor, shame, and civic responsibility. Religious festivals provided sanctioned opportunities for sexual excess that would otherwise be forbidden. The Dionysiac celebrations involved ritual intoxication and sexual abandon that temporarily suspended normal social rules. Participants engaged in activities that were considered sacred when performed in honor of the god, but criminal in ordinary circumstances. These festivals served as pressure release valves for a society that maintained strict sexual hierarchies throughout the rest of the year. The cult of Aphrodite institutionalized prostitution as a form of religious devotion. Temple prostitutes, both male and female, served worshippers who believed sexual activity could bring them closer to the divine. The most famous of these establishments was located in Corinth, where hundreds of sacred prostitutes generated enormous wealth for the temple while serving clients from across the Mediterranean world. Marriage in ancient Greece bore little resemblance to modern romantic partnerships. Arranged by families for political and economic purposes, marriages typically paired teenage girls with men twice their age. The wedding ceremony itself included rituals that symbolically represented the bride's transition from her father's property to her husband's possession. Sexual compatibility was irrelevant to these arrangements, which prioritized the production of legitimate heirs over emotional satisfaction. The domestic arrangements of married couples reflected these priorities. Wealthy households maintained separate quarters for men and women, with wives confined to interior spaces, while husbands entertained guests in areas where respectable women were forbidden to appear. Sexual relations between spouses were regulated by beliefs about conception, menstruation, and religious pollution that dictated when and how couples could be intimate. Contraception and abortion were practiced using methods that combined practical knowledge with magical thinking. Women employed various herbs, pessaries, and physical techniques to prevent pregnancy or terminate unwanted pregnancies. Some of these methods were surprisingly effective, while others were dangerous or completely useless. The availability of such practices allowed for sexual relationships that were not primarily reproductive, though their use was largely limited to prostitutes and slaves. The gymnasium culture that produced some of history's greatest athletes was built around a system of institutionalized voyeurism and sexual competition. Men and boys exercised completely naked while spectators observed and judged their physical development. These observations were not merely aesthetic, but served as preliminary stages in courtship rituals that could lead to long-term relationships combining mentorship with sexual intimacy. Athletic competitions provided additional venues for sexual display and selection. The Olympic Games and other festivals attracted participants who competed naked before audiences that included potential lovers and patrons. Victory in these competitions enhanced a young man's desirability and could lead to advantageous relationships with powerful older men who could advance their careers and social status. The drinking party known as the symposium represented perhaps the most sophisticated expression of Greek sexual culture. These gatherings combined intellectual discourse with carefully orchestrated sexual entertainment. Professional entertainers, including musicians, dancers, and prostitutes, provided services that ranged from artistic performance to intimate companionship. The symposium operated according to complex social rules that governed everything from seating arrangements to sexual etiquette. Participants in symposiums engaged in drinking games, philosophical debates, and sexual activities that were choreographed to demonstrate their cultural sophistication and social status. The presence of slaves and prostitutes allowed free men to indulge in practices that would be inappropriate with social equals while maintaining their reputations as refined intellectuals. These events served multiple functions as networking opportunities, cultural exhibitions, and sexual marketplaces. The evidence for these practices comes primarily from pottery, literature, and architectural remains that have survived from antiquity. Vase paintings provide the most explicit documentation of sexual activities, though scholars debate whether these images represent actual practices or artistic fantasies. The literary sources, including comedy, poetry, and philosophical texts, offer additional insights into Greek sexual attitudes, though they must be interpreted carefully considering their intended audiences and purposes. Archaeological excavations have uncovered buildings and artifacts that illuminate the physical settings where these sexual practices occurred. Brothels, private homes, and religious sanctuaries all contain evidence of the spaces where Greeks conducted their intimate lives. The material evidence reveals a culture that was simultaneously more open and more restricted than modern societies, with public displays of sexuality coexisting with rigid hierarchical controls. The philosophical underpinnings of Greek sexual behavior reflected deeper beliefs about human nature and cosmic order that distinguished between natural and unnatural acts based on social rather than moral criteria. What modern society might consider deviant was often celebrated as spiritually elevating, while practices we view as normal were sometimes condemned as violations of proper hierarchy. The Stoics and other philosophical schools developed elaborate theories about sexual desire that treated physical pleasure as secondary to its role in maintaining social stability and producing virtuous citizens. The medical theories of ancient Greece attributed sexual behavior to the balance of bodily humors and the influence of celestial bodies. Physicians prescribed specific sexual activities as treatments for various ailments, believing that certain positions and frequencies of intercourse could cure everything from melancholy to digestive disorders. These medical recommendations were taken seriously by wealthy Greeks who could afford professional health care, leading to sexual practices guided more by therapeutic concerns than personal preference. The legal system of ancient Athens regulated sexual behavior through laws that seem arbitrary by contemporary standards. While certain acts were punishable by death or exile, others that appear equally extreme were not only permitted but encouraged through religious and social institutions. The distinction often depended on the social status of the participants rather than the nature of the acts themselves. Free citizens enjoyed sexual privileges that were forbidden to slaves and foreigners, creating a complex hierarchy of permitted pleasures. Prostitution in ancient Greece operated on multiple levels that reflected the broader social stratification of the period. At the bottom were common streetwalkers who served laborers and soldiers for minimal payment. Above them were brothel workers who catered to merchants and craftsmen in establishments that ranged from squalid rooms to luxurious houses equipped with baths and entertainment areas. At the apex were the hetairae, sophisticated courtesans who commanded enormous fees for their company and often wielded significant political influence through their relationships with powerful men. The hetairae represented a unique class of women who achieved independence and wealth through their sexual and intellectual skills. Unlike respectable wives who were confined to domestic roles, these courtesans attended symposiums, participated in philosophical discussions, and traveled freely throughout the Greek world. Their houses became centers of cultural activity where poets, politicians, and philosophers gathered to enjoy refined pleasures that combined physical intimacy with intellectual stimulation. The training of hetairae began in childhood and involved instruction in music, dance, conversation, and sexual techniques that prepared them for careers serving the most discriminating clients. These women learned to read and write, studied poetry and philosophy, and developed artistic talents that made them sought-after companions rather than mere sexual objects. Their education often surpassed that of respectable women, creating the paradox of a society where prostitutes were more cultured than wives. The economic aspects of Greek sexual culture created markets for services and products that seem bizarre by modern standards. Specialized craftsmen produced erotic art, sex toys, and aphrodisiacs that catered to sophisticated tastes. The pottery workshops of Athens generated thousands of vessels decorated with explicit sexual scenes that served both as functional objects and instructional materials. These items were traded throughout the Mediterranean, spreading Greek sexual practices and attitudes to other cultures. The religious festivals dedicated to fertility deities provided sanctioned opportunities for sexual activities that temporarily suspended normal social restrictions. During these celebrations, married women engaged in ritual promiscuity while their husbands participated in ceremonies involving temporary gender reversal. The most extreme of these festivals required participants to engage in specific sexual acts that were believed necessary for ensuring agricultural fertility and cosmic harmony. The mystery religions that flourished throughout the Greek world incorporated sexual symbolism and practices into their initiation ceremonies. Initiates underwent ritual experiences that included symbolic sexual union with deities, actual sexual activities with other participants, or both. These ceremonies were conducted in absolute secrecy, with participants sworn to silence about what they had experienced. The few surviving accounts suggest that sexual activity was viewed as a means of achieving spiritual transformation and divine knowledge. The therapeutic use of sexuality extended beyond individual medical treatment to encompass beliefs about community health and divine favor. Cities organized ritual sexual activities that were thought to protect against plague, ensure military victory, or guarantee favorable weather for crops. These community-wide ceremonies required participation from citizens across all social levels, creating temporary suspension of normal sexual hierarchies in service of collective welfare. The artistic representation of sexual themes in Greek culture went far beyond mere decoration or titillation. Erotic imagery served educational, religious, and political purposes that reflected the integration of sexuality into all aspects of civilized life. Public buildings, private homes, and religious sanctuaries featured explicit sexual art that communicated messages about social order, divine power, and human nature to audiences that included children and foreigners. The influence of Greek sexual culture extended throughout the ancient Mediterranean world through colonization, trade, and cultural exchange. Roman elites adopted many Greek practices while modifying them to suit their own social structures and values. The spread of Greek educational methods brought pederastic relationships to societies that had previously organized sexuality along different lines, creating hybrid practices that combined local traditions with Greek innovations. The seasonal cycles of ancient Greek life created rhythms of sexual activity that corresponded to agricultural and religious calendars. Certain times of year were considered appropriate for marriage, conception, or ritual sexual activity, while others required abstinence or specific types of sexual behavior. These temporal regulations reflected beliefs about cosmic influences on human fertility and the proper relationship between human sexuality and natural cycles. The evidence suggests that Greek sexual practices varied significantly between different city-states and historical periods, making generalizations about the entire culture problematic. What was acceptable in Athens might be forbidden in Sparta, while practices common during the classical period might have been unknown during earlier or later eras. This diversity reflects the decentralized nature of Greek civilization and the ongoing evolution of sexual norms in response to changing political, economic, and cultural conditions. The documentation of these practices in literature, art, and legal texts reveals a society that was remarkably frank about sexuality while maintaining complex systems of regulation and control. The Greeks developed sophisticated vocabularies for discussing sexual behavior, created artistic traditions that celebrated physical pleasure, and established institutions that channeled sexual energy towards socially beneficial purposes. Their approach to sexuality was simultaneously more open and more restrictive than modern Western attitudes, reflecting fundamentally different assumptions about the relationship between individual desire and collective welfare. The archaeological evidence for Greek sexual practices becomes even more fascinating when examined through the lens of material culture and daily life. Excavations at Pompeii and other sites have revealed intimate objects that illuminate the private world of ancient sexuality. Bronze and ceramic phalluses served not merely as decorative items, but as protective amulets believed to ward off evil and ensure fertility. These objects appeared in homes, shops, and public spaces, demonstrating how sexual symbolism permeated the physical environment of Greek cities. The manufacturing of erotic objects represented a sophisticated industry that catered to diverse tastes and social levels. Artisans created elaborate dildos from leather, wood, and stone, some decorated with intricate carvings that elevated functional items to works of art. The technical skill required to produce these objects reveals a culture that valued craftsmanship even in the most intimate aspects of human experience. Trade routes carried these products throughout the Mediterranean, spreading Greek innovations in sexual technology to distant lands. The bathing culture of ancient Greece provided additional venues for sexual encounter and display. Public bathhouses served as social centers where nudity was normal and physical contact occurred within established protocols. The elaborate architecture of these facilities, with their heated pools, massage rooms, and private chambers, created environments specifically designed for sensual pleasure. Wealthy Greeks employed teams of slaves trained in massage techniques that combined therapeutic and erotic elements. The seasonal festivals that punctuated the Greek calendar included numerous celebrations where sexual behavior took on ceremonial significance. The Anthesteria festival involved ritual drinking and sexual license that honored Dionysus while providing sanctioned release from normal social constraints. During these events, masks and costumes allowed participants to assume different identities, enabling sexual experimentation that would be impossible under ordinary circumstances. The role of wine in Greek sexual culture cannot be understated. The symposium drinking parties followed elaborate protocols that gradually loosened inhibitions while maintaining social hierarchies. Professional cupbearers, typically attractive young men, served wine mixed with water according to precise ratios designed to produce specific levels of intoxication. The progression from intellectual discourse to sexual activity was carefully orchestrated through drinking games and entertainment that built toward increasingly intimate encounters. The influence of theatrical performance on Greek sexuality extended beyond the comedies and tragedies performed in public amphitheaters. Private theatrical entertainments featuring explicit sexual content were popular at wealthy gatherings, with professional actors performing scenes that combined artistic merit with erotic stimulation. These performances often involved audience participation, blurring the lines between observation and participation in ways that challenged conventional boundaries between art and life. The medical understanding of sexuality in ancient Greece incorporated beliefs about bodily humors and cosmic influences that seem bizarre by modern standards. Physicians prescribed specific sexual positions to treat various ailments, believing that different arrangements of bodies could rebalance internal energies and restore health. The timing of sexual activity was coordinated with lunar cycles and astrological calculations, creating elaborate systems for optimizing both pleasure and therapeutic benefit. The legal status of sexual relationships in Greek society created paradoxes that reveal the complexity of ancient attitudes toward intimacy and power. While pederastic relationships between free men and boys were celebrated, similar relationships involving slaves or foreigners were subject to different regulations. The law distinguished between consensual and coercive sexual activity based on social status rather than individual consent, creating a framework that protected some while leaving others vulnerable to exploitation. The religious dimensions of Greek sexuality extended beyond fertility cults to encompass beliefs about the divine nature of physical pleasure itself. Certain sexual acts were considered forms of prayer or meditation that could induce mystical experiences and divine revelation. The priests and priestesses who oversaw these rituals underwent extensive training in techniques that combined spiritual preparation with sexual expertise, creating a class of religious professionals whose duties included facilitating transcendent, intimate experiences. The economic implications of Greek sexual culture created markets for services and products that generated substantial wealth for some participants while exploiting others. The slave trade included specialists in sexual entertainment who commanded high prices based on their training and physical attributes. The breeding of slaves specifically for sexual purposes created a systematic approach to human exploitation that reveals the darker aspects of a culture often celebrated for its philosophical achievements. The architectural spaces designed for sexual activity in Greek homes and public buildings demonstrate sophisticated understanding of privacy, comfort, and aesthetic enhancement. Private chambers featured elaborate decorations, comfortable furnishings, and practical amenities that facilitated intimate encounters. The positioning of windows, doors, and ventilation systems was calculated to provide optimal lighting, airflow, and acoustics for sexual activities that might last for hours. The documentation of sexual practices in Greek literature reveals authors who wrote with remarkable frankness about intimate details that later cultures would consider unprintable. The comic playwright Aristophanes included explicit sexual humor in works performed before audiences that included women and children, suggesting a level of openness about bodily functions and intimate behavior that seems shocking by contemporary standards. These literary works preserve vocabularies for sexual acts and anatomical terms that provide insight into how Greeks understood and discussed their bodies. The international dimensions of Greek sexual culture extended through trade networks and diplomatic relationships that carried intimate practices across vast distances. Greek colonists established communities throughout the Mediterranean that served as centers for cultural exchange, including the transmission of sexual customs and techniques. The interaction between Greek and local traditions produced hybrid practices that combined elements from multiple cultures in ways that enriched the diversity of ancient intimate life. The evidence suggests that Greek sexual practices continued to evolve throughout the classical period in response to changing political, economic, and cultural conditions. What began as relatively simple customs developed into elaborate systems that incorporated influences from Egypt, Persia, and other civilizations encountered through conquest and trade. The sophistication of later Greek sexual culture reflected the cosmopolitan nature of Hellenistic society and its openness to innovation and experimentation. The preservation of erotic art and literature from ancient Greece required conscious decisions by later generations to maintain access to materials that many societies would have destroyed. The survival of explicit pottery, sculptures, and texts demonstrates the enduring fascination with Greek sexuality and its influence on subsequent cultures. The scholarly study of these materials has revealed aspects of ancient life that challenge romantic notions about the past while providing insights into universal aspects of human behavior. The legacy of Greek sexual practices extends beyond historical curiosity to encompass ongoing debates about the relationship between individual desire and social regulation. The Greek approach to sexuality as a reflection of political power and social hierarchy offers perspectives on contemporary issues involving consent, equality, and the role of government in regulating intimate behavior. The complexity of ancient attitudes towards sexuality serves as a reminder that human intimate life has always been shaped by cultural forces that extend far beyond individual choice and biological impulse. The study of Greek sexuality reveals a civilization that was simultaneously more sophisticated and more brutal than popular imagination suggests, where philosophical achievement coexisted with systematic exploitation, and where celebrations of physical beauty masked rigid hierarchies of power and privilege. The marble statues that continue to inspire admiration today emerged from a culture where sexuality was weaponized, sanctified, and systematically controlled in ways that shaped every aspect of daily life from birth to death. The marble facades that house these intimate rituals have crumbled, and the pottery that documented such explicit practices now rests behind museum glass, sanitized and academic. Yet the shadows cast by ancient Greek sexuality stretch across millennia, revealing uncomfortable truths about power, desire, and the human condition that resonate through modern consciousness. What emerges from this examination is not merely a catalogue of bizarre practices, but a mirror reflecting how any civilization uses intimacy to reinforce its deepest beliefs about hierarchy, divinity, and social order. The Greeks who gave us philosophy and democracy also created a sexual culture that was simultaneously more liberated and more oppressive than anything we know today. Their approach to intimacy reveals the eternal tension between individual desire and collective control, between sacred celebration and systematic exploitation. The gymnasium where naked athletes trained, the symposium where wine flowed alongside philosophical discourse, and the temples where sexuality served divine purpose all demonstrate how thoroughly intimate behavior can be woven into the fabric of civilization itself. Perhaps most disturbing is how easily the extraordinary became routine in Greek society, how practices that would horrify modern sensibilities were not only accepted but institutionalized as expressions of cultural sophistication. The normalization of what we would consider extreme reveals the fragility of moral boundaries and the power of social conditioning to shape even our most private moments. In examining these ancient customs, we confront the unsettling reality that civilization's veneer has always been thinner than we imagine, and that the distance between enlightenment and brutality often measures less than we would like to believe.